39. The Nature of the Spirit, Part 2. 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verses 26 to 34. How is it then, brethren, when ye come together, every one of you hath a psalm, hath a doctrine, hath a tongue, hath a revelation, hath an interpretation? Let all things be done unto edifying. If any man speak in an unknown tongue, let it be by 2, or at the most by 3, and that by course, that is, in turn, rotation, and let one interpret. But if there be no interpreter, let him keep silence in the church, and let him speak to himself and to God. Let the prophets speak 2 or 3, and let the other judge. If anything be revealed to another that sitteth by, let the first hold his peace. For ye may all prophesy one by one, that all may learn, and all may be comforted. And the spirits of the prophets are subject to the prophets. For God is not the author of confusion, but of peace, as in all the churches of the saints. Let your women keep silence in the churches, for it is not permitted unto them to speak, but they are commanded to be under obedience, as also saith the law. One of the major errors in the church when it entered the non-Hebraic world was the common misinterpretation of the doctrine of the Holy Spirit. In the Greco-Roman world, spiritistic utterances were ecstatic, mysterious, and never easily construed. In fact, they were always subject to a double meaning. For example, one ruler went to one of the pagan oracles for a word as to whether he should attack a particular enemy, a very powerful imperial force. And the spirit said, "Attack and you will destroy an empire." He did. The empire he destroyed was his own. All the examples we have of the pagan oracles have a double meaning. As a result, they were regularly misinterpreted. Such a view crept readily into Christian circles because, for the pagans, the Holy Spirit was not a part of the Trinity, the Godhead. As against this ancient pagan view of an ecstatic and irrational spirit which crept through the church, some theologians tried to counteract. The great statement about God and the Holy Trinity is in section 1 of chapter 2 of the Westminster Confession of Faith, 1729, which reads, "There is but one living and true God, who is infinite in being and perfection, a most pure spirit, invisible, without body, parts, or passions, immutable, immense, eternal, incomprehensible, almighty, most wise, most holy, most free, most absolute, working all things according to the counsel of his own immutable and most righteous will, for his own glory, most loving, gracious, merciful, long-suffering, abundant in goodness and truth, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin, the rewarder of them that diligently seek him, and withal, most just and terrible in his judgment, hating all sin, and will by no means clear the guilty." This description, not a definition, is very much in line with Exodus chapter 3, verses 14 and 15, where God tells Moses that he cannot be defined. He is beyond all limitations, and definitions are descriptions, limitations, and set forth boundaries. God reveals himself in his self-revelation, and we thereby know him truly. Paul's concern is thus that the church meetings and worship be carried on with godly order. In verses 26 to 29, Paul limits the speaking in tongues or revelations to 2 or 3 persons. None have the right to commandeer the service. They are to speak in rotation, in an orderly fashion. Paul's emphasis on order is very important. If their speaking is of the Holy Spirit, it must be part of an orderly service, because God the Spirit is not the author of confusion. This emphasis on order is applied to all charismatic manifestations, and this tells us that Paul's view of the Holy Spirit is one of heightened understanding and order. In verse 30, we are told that if the Holy Spirit reveals anything to someone else, that person is to hold his peace for the time being. Again, we have an emphasis on godly orderliness. His understandings of the nature of the Holy Spirit are not restricted to charismatics. Modernists, Reformed scholars, and Arminian scholars are also prone to them. Now, Paul's emphasis is that we cannot view the Holy Spirit as irrational and mindless and disorderly. The purpose of the Spirit and his utterances to people is plainly stated by Paul in verse 31, that all may learn. The force of this statement cannot be eroded. It cannot be set aside. The purpose of the service of worship is the praise of God and learning by the participants. There can be no learning without teaching, and the purpose of the Holy Spirit was to expand wisdom and understanding. When prophets speak, the Spirit is working within the prophet to enable his spirit to speak more powerfully and clearly. The spirits of prophets are subject to the prophets, that is, are under their control. The notion that the prophet is out of control is wrong. There is only one place in the entire Bible where the Spirit, when it takes possession of a man, makes him out of control. That was Saul. In 1 Samuel chapter 19, verse 24, when Saul, being an unbeliever, saw the Spirit, his impact on Saul was abnormal and devastating, not a normal one. The Holy Spirit is supremely the Spirit of wisdom and understanding. His work in creation in Genesis chapter 1 verse 2 is currently much misunderstood because in many circles, creativity is associated with a mindless spontaneity rather than with understanding. As a result, creation is seen as comparable to modern art rather than a planned and purposive design. This is hardly a biblical view. Paul, as a result, is quite insistent. For God is not the author of confusion, but of peace, as in all the churches of the saints. Verse 33. This latter clause tells us that in Paul's day, in the Jewish churches, there was peace, not confusion. Charismatic experiences were viewed in the Hebrew terms, respected and orderly. Paul sets forth thus the standard Jewish charismatic practice as godly and normative. At present, many churches are experimenting with, quote, alternate end quote styles of worship. These are designed to enhance audience appeal, and the assumption is not godly, namely that pleasing men will please God. Some forms include drama and dance, or, quote, audience participation, end quote. The congregation is seen as an audience, not as a worshipping body. Worship is replaced with theatre and drama. Such forms of apostasy have nothing to commend them. In all these things, the nature of the Holy Spirit is misconstrued. The church is confused with a theatre and drama, and God is replaced with an idea. We saw earlier that the triune God is beyond definition. He reveals rather than defines himself. False efforts to know God lead to attempts to penetrate the meaning of the Godhead directly, an impossibility. John chapter 1 verse 18 is emphatic. No man hath seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, which is in the bosom of the Father, he hath declared him. The declaration, or exegesis of God the Father and God the Spirit, is the Son, Jesus Christ. He is their exegesis, their declaration. Thus, the quote-unquote definition of the Trinity rests on our knowledge of Jesus Christ, God the Son. Since he is made like unto us, we can know him. Since he is the express image of God, we can know God. For charismatics and non-charismatics to give us a neo-pagan view of God the Spirit is to make knowing God almost impossible. The Father is not the, quote, property, end quote, of Unitarians, nor the Spirit the property of charismatics. We have one God in three persons, and Jesus Christ has declared or exegeted his meaning.